Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon, Organizational Architecture Process. This is a series, so if you did miss the few that have been before this one, they are all on our on-demand and our website. So if you're interested, go take a look out there. But for now, just a few housekeeping items before I turn it over to Christy for the next hour. You can customize what you're seeing on the screen by going to the GoToWebinar screen viewer. And you can maximize the presentation or maximize the webcam to feel like you're in the room with Christy. Whatever you fancy, you can customize it. We do have two different audio options this afternoon. We have one over the computer internet and one over the phone call option. You were provided dial-in instructions with your registration, so if you do find that the computer audio is a little glitchy, you can toggle between those two to figure out which one works best for you. We do monitor the questions panel during this presentation. We do not monitor the chat, however. So if you have any questions, please insert them into the questions panel and we will do our best to answer them throughout. If not, Christy will reach out to you personally via email and connect with you there. We will have 3 polling questions for this presentation. That is to allow us to send you CPE credits. So if you're looking for that, make sure you're participating in those. Again, we will have 3 of them. You can download the handout that's in the handout section of the GoToWebinar screen viewer, or I guess the GoToWebinar panel, excuse me, and that will be the presentation that Christy's walking through for the next hour. Speaking of CPE, please allow a couple business days for those to get back to you. We do use a third-party system called SimpleStart to send those out. So if you're not seeing those in your inbox within the next week, please check your junk or spam folders. And if you do not receive, please email us and we will get on top of that. And lastly, we will have a survey for you to fill out after the presentation. This is to let us know how we did, let us know any questions that may have gone unanswered, any topics that you want us to cover in the future, and this is where you will elect if you need that CPE option or not. So without further ado, Christy, they're all yours.
Thank you so much, Kaylee, and thank you to everybody who has joined us today. Welcome to the 4th installment of our series here today. Many of you know me. I shouldn't be new to any of you, but if I am, you certainly can read about my bio. At the end of the presentation here, I'll sum it up for you in one word. It's called nerd. You can also find out more information on our website as well, but I'm happy to share the next hour with you. Hopefully you'll take away at least one gold nugget here as we walk through processes. That's the topic for today. We're going to talk about how you can define them to achieve the desired business objectives, how you should approach documenting your processes, and then measures that you can put into place to hold people accountable. Certainly, I hear that word used a lot. I just wish people were more accountable, or how do I increase accountability in my organization? And so we actually have some simple ways for you to start putting pressure on that very topic, if you will. And then how do the processes contribute to your overall business success? So that's what we're going to focus on today. Have a couple definitions, tips, tricks, as well as refresh your memory on some models and so forth. But before we dig in here, I would like to just take a moment to say thank you to a special person who has been with me along this journey for several years now. I'm not going to mention her name. She knows who she is, and certainly if she gives me permission, I will reveal it in the last installment that we do here. But a lot of research, effort, energy went into this initiative here, the organizational architecture, and thinking very thoughtfully and thoroughly about each one of these components that we've been walking through. And what does it really mean, and how can we best position our organizations for the future that's ahead of us? One that we know that's constantly changing, but also one approach that would allow us to be able to provide that structure and really rely on a good foundation, no matter what life might throw at us, right? You've got inflation, recession, you got all that good stuff that seems to pop up here and there. And so what can we do within our organizations to not only make it through the current times, but also have a sustainable model and hopefully be very successful well into the future? So for those who haven't joined us, we've been walking through this graphic in each one of our sessions, so feel free to go back and listen to them. And for those who have been following along, thank you. I appreciate your dedication to carving out an hour every 2 weeks to walk through this with us. But today we are going to focus on the orange gear. We're going to focus on processes. And then the one that we have left is structure, which we'll tackle in September as we move forward towards the end of summer here. So let's go ahead and start with a couple of key questions. As I was thinking about processes and the message that I wanted to deliver to you today, I was thinking about some of these items here on this list and things that I've heard over the years of where maybe some of the confusion, chaos, etc. happens in our organizations. And so as we walk forward with processes, we certainly will be able to clear up some of the confusion, hopefully within your organizations. But I also want you to give thought as you reflect on your own organization as a whole, or if you're just going to think about your particular business unit for this instance. But do you find that there's silos within your organization? Or maybe people are beating to their own drum in their own area and maybe not even aware what's happening in the next department over, or in another state, or in another country for that matter. And so what does that communication look like? What is the flow of information between one unit and the other, one place to another, etc.? And so just give thought to that as to, how have those silos developed or bloomed, if you will? Is it because of maybe prior ownership, or is it just maybe that there's cultural differences or other things that contribute to that? But essentially, how can we maybe minimize or totally destroy those silos in our organization, have more collaboration, have more communication, and so forth? And so as you think about the communication in your organization, is it good? How would you measure it? Do you even know what good communication looks like and or sounds like? Some people will quickly say, yeah, we've got good communication. We say hi and hello, but do they really understand what effective communication is and what that looks like? So here again are just thoughts for you to ponder as we're walking through today, and as you walk away from the session, and just reflect on your own organizations. And then, do you have collaboration that happens within your own unit or department, cross-departmental, across different divisions, etc.? What does that look like? How is it fostered? Is it starting? Has it been in a great place all along? Every company that's on the session today would probably answer that differently, and that's okay. This isn't cookie cutter by any means. And what about decision making? That's one where, do we have really something outlined showing who should make a decision, who shouldn't, and why? What are the type of decisions that need to be made? And can we have people have some autonomy to do the tasks that they need to without really having to make decisions because they have the processes and so forth in place, right? All good questions. And within your organization, do you believe that employees truly are empowered? Do you allow them some autonomy, some ability to do their own thing and use their own discretion, certainly within boundaries? We don't want to just let them out on their own like a free horse in the pasture. But certainly, do they even know that they have the ability to be empowered, and how they feel about that? Are we talking about those conversations each year when we meet with them during their performance review, and or when we do our regular check-ins weekly, monthly, etc.? So all good key questions that I think you'll answer differently as we move forward, and certainly might work towards getting to a better place with any of these if you just had a little bit of pause as we were walking through there and I maybe gave you a little bit of a cringe moment. But we're going to go ahead and tee up our first poll question here. So Kaylee, if you'll go ahead and get that teed up, I'm interested to hear which one of these exists in your organization. Confusion, anxiety, redundancy and gaps, frustration, turnover, and information overload, or all of the above. So if you'll take a few moments and go ahead and select one of those, I'm actually going to approach this a little bit differently coming out of this question. So once we get to 85% or so, Kaylee will go ahead and shut it down, share the results, and then I have another slide where we're going to actually walk through and discuss this in more depth rather than just looking at the results and you hearing my reaction to those results. So I'm not surprised by what I'm seeing so far, and it's okay. That's why we're here today. I'm going to give you some clarity of areas that you can narrow in on based upon how you've answered. So hopefully it's helpful when we do give these poll questions for you to then take the data back and say, hey, team, I was on a webinar and so many percent answered this way, others answered like me, and then others were in a bucket that I didn't expect, right? So these questions are not only for us to gain insight about all of you, but hopefully for you to take back to your organization and be able to have a discussion about it. What are the peers that you were on this session with doing, thinking, or handling, etc.? So Kaylee, I think we're almost there. We need just one or two more people here to go ahead and check one off for us, so I can stop talking and rambling at you. Okay, Kaylee, go ahead, share those results. So as I expected, many of you believe that you have one or more of these happening within your organization, and that's okay, right? But they're all solvable, and there's definitely things you can do to make them better, elevate them, or maybe completely reduce them in your organization. So wouldn't that be exciting? Well, let's go ahead now and go to this next slide I have for you. So let's walk through those specific terms that I had you answer, right? So if there's confusion within your organization, and some of you answered that way, 13%, have you clearly defined your purpose or cause? And if it is defined, when's the last time that you put that out in front of your team, right? So we walked through that in one of the sessions here of the series. So if you missed it, go back. But that would definitely be the first place to start. If you have confusion in your organization, or if you answered yes to one or more of these, because that essentially will help drive why. Why do we do what we do? It will then help you with some of that decision making and so forth that follows out of that. Anxiety. So if people are nervous within your organization, and I probably should have been a little more clear on this one, I'm not talking about anxiety that people individually have as maybe just a condition like depression and so forth, but more so, are they anxious about the work they have to do? Are they unsure? Do they lack the confidence? Maybe it's because we as an organization just truly haven't decided what is the best use of our time. What are the strengths that we have, and how do we leverage them? So that would be an area to peel back, especially if you answered yes to that one in particular. If you're finding that there's redundancy and gaps, I wonder, is your structure appropriate in your organization for the type of work, service, products that you make? And so we'll be digging into that a little bit more in depth in that last session here in September. So more to come on that. But certainly we can reduce the redundancy. We can hopefully fill in those gaps, and we can peel that onion back and really figure out where is that happening and why. Is it because there's a lack of communication? Is there because we have silos? Is the decision making not clear, etc.? So we definitely will dig into that further. And then lastly, the reason we're all here today is that many of you, if you don't have your processes defined, or you don't have policies in place or procedures, you might have exactly what's listed here: frustration in the workforce, people not understanding what's expected of them, or they think they understand and find out it's not, so then they disappointed somebody. Coworkers, if they don't understand what each person is supposed to be doing in their department, they could feel like somebody's not carrying their weight and so forth, so that might lead to the frustration. Maybe they don't know what they need. But then turnover too, if people don't truly know what's expected of them and they're not able to perform at the highest and best use of their time, then maybe they're going to look somewhere else to be fulfilled in that way. In our culture series, we talked about behaviors, and we talked about those intrinsic motivations or motivators. And certainly if that's not aligned between the organization and an individual, that could just lead to some frustration and cause people to leave, right? And then information overload. I think we all can relate to that, right? So how do we reduce that? How do we minimize the emails? Okay, try to reduce them. I don't know that we can totally minimize them to the point we'd all be happy, but I mean, we just constantly are given more information. We're, being pinged all the time, whether it's on Teams, social media, etc. And so how do we maybe reduce the amount of information that's shared, make it a little more concise and succinct, so that way we can help reduce that overload feeling or that burden that many of us carry. So hopefully this was helpful for all of you and that you have found a little bit of clarity with this as to maybe where specifically you can start poking in at your organization and peeling that onion back and really digging in and figuring out, okay, how do we get better, right? We may not be able to solve it 100%, but what can we do to make it better? So last session, I had introduced a couple models and theories to you, and I'm going to stay consistent with this session as well. Many of you have probably already seen this, the general systems theory. Certainly, if you go out to Google Scholar, you can research it on your own, and many people, scholars and theorists, have talked about this. But essentially, as you're looking at an organization, you think about the inputs. What do we put into our organization? What do we do with it? Is there any feedback that's shared during that process? And then what comes out of that? Is it a product? Is it a service? Is it something else? And then surrounding us is the environment, not only internally, but externally as well. So as we keep that in mind and we think about the flow of our organization, we think about what's coming in, going through, and coming out, we need to make sure that we have the right things documented along the way so we can be most successful, right? Make sure that we have the right people in the right role, doing the right task in the right way, and hopefully all of that, if we have it in a good place, we're providing high quality work, high quality products, etc. And hopefully there's consistency and so forth. So all of those we're going to talk about further as we move forward here, but each of you will get a copy of this slide deck. It's there in your handout section like Kaylee has shared. We'll send it out to you as well so you can scribble on it, take notes, and maybe just go back and read it further to see how specifically for your industry does it relate, and are there specific examples out there that are already drafted that you could pull from, right? Certainly go to Google, type in systems theory and architecture, right? Or manufacturing, and you definitely will find a lot of great resources out there. Be cautious, make sure that it's a good resource for you, but you can at least visually start seeing specifically for your organization what this might look like. And I do have a couple examples as we walk forward here. So when you think about a basic business model, right? The way that we get input is through business development or sales. We have customers that are interested in our product or service. And so we put that request through our system, right? We say, hey, we have somebody who wants to buy our product or service. And then within our organization, we've already either made the product or we will, work to provide the service and so forth. So there's a lot of things that happen swirling around that big category there of the delivery. And how do we make that happen with operations and, inventory and technology and all that good stuff. And then you have the support, which is your administrative team, HR, finance, etc. All of those individuals that help the organization to be able to deliver on what it set out to deliver, right? Why did we start our business? What are we going to do as a result? And what value are we providing to our clients? And so everything has to work smoothly together to be able to deliver on what we promised to our customers and so forth. So I want to start with policy. So as we're thinking about the flow through our organization, right? We have to be able to have some rules in place. And I'm not saying that you need to be so rigid with a hammer and make it so difficult for people to enjoy what they do, where they feel like they have no flexibility, no autonomy, no ability to be empowered. But we do have to put some things in place. We have to put a course or principle of action in place for individuals, right? Because we have to be able to give guidelines or boundaries to the behaviors of the organization. If we don't, that's when our culture is going to skew out of control and we won't be able to rein it back in without significant effort and energy. So I did put something here that's a pain to everybody. I hear it all the time. Oh, timesheets, right? So let's just use that simply as an example as we walk through here with policy, right? So timesheets must be entered daily. So we've set the expectation, and they must be submitted for approval by close of business each Friday. That's a rule. Why is that important? Well, one, we want to make sure that employees along the way don't forget to record some hours that they worked. We could get in trouble with Department of Labor. We want to make sure that if we are in an industry where we're looking at projections and forecasting and resources and billing, That's critically important to know where our people are working, what projects and so forth, who's taking time off, who's out sick, etc., right? So it's very important that not only we put the rule in place, but then we tell our team, why do we have to have that rule? Well, because there's so many things that are impacted when we don't do a good job of entering our timesheets daily, right? We want to make sure they're accurate. We want to make sure we pay people properly. We want to make sure that our accounting records are accurate, so that way we can bill our customers accordingly or charge them for the products, etc. So policy is so very important, and I wanted to just call that out because as we have the flow through our organization, there are rules that we have to set up along the way so people know what to do and what not to do. Put those guide rails, and that also will help guide decision making. So here on my next slide, I walk through specifically some of the advantages of policies. I know people cringe, oh, here comes another policy, right? Or that's all corporate wants to do is put a policy in place. And so I get it, there's frustration sometimes, but it's needed. And we just have to continue to emphasize why. What does it allow us to do? Well, it does help guide that decision making because we don't want people to make uninformed decisions along the way, right? Because there could be consequences to that. We also want to provide those boundaries for employee behavior. What can you do? What can't you do? Because if we do have performance issues along the way, maybe it's because they're disregarding policies and we can hopefully get them to correct the behavior, or we might have to go down a different path. But then think about the corporate goals that you have outlined. You have to be able to achieve them for success, right? And so, or identify quickly if it was a goal that just wasn't the right one to put in place at that time. And so, making sure that the policies are aligned with what we're hoping to achieve, so that way, again, that flow happens the way it's supposed to. And then certainly we can't forget about compliance, right? There's certain laws, rules at the federal, state, and local level that we have to ensure that we're adhering to, or we could get in significant trouble. But then also just think about the quality and the standards, etc. We do want to make sure we're not too rigid because that will cause people to maybe not want to work with us or for us. But certainly it's a healthy balance to have some good policies in place that are constructive and are there for good reason. So now let's talk about procedure before we get to process. So procedure is really that series of actions or tasks conducted in a certain order or manner. So let's take that timesheet example a step further. So I kept it very broad here. As you would be documenting an actual procedure, you would want to be more specific to what your organization has, but log into the system. Maybe it's Deltek Vision, maybe it's Viewpoint, whatever that system, QuickBooks might be, but you log in there and you go to the timesheet module, whatever that's called. On the first row, select the project, the phase, the task, or however they code their time, PTO, holiday, general admin, whatever that might be. Enter the hours and the minutes, and there's a procedure here. We want to do it in quarter-hour increments. Maybe that's not true in your organization. Then you click Save, and then in the toolbar at the top, you're going to go ahead and click Submit after all your hours have been entered for the week, right? So that's the instruction to the employee. Certainly, there's procedures for supervisors and so forth, and so this is just a very small snapshot just to give you an example of what that would look like. Specifically, what system, technology, tool needs to be used, how do they go about it, and is there anything specific that they need to do as they're completing that step or task, right? And so this would apply to all areas of your organization, from the things that you do within your business development or sales team, all the way through to operations, your quality department, maybe you're creating drawings or designing things, etc., putting together widgets, whatever that might be. And then surrounding all of that, there are definitely procedures within finance, HR, IT, etc. So it is a big undertaking. If you have nothing in place, it's definitely a huge undertaking, but it definitely is possible. And you can prioritize what is most significant, what needs to be accomplished first, and how can we plan this out maybe over the next 6 months or the year, depending on what that time frame is. But if you're in the position where you're thinking about buying an organization or selling your organization, think how valuable it is to know that there's procedures documented So that way you can share that knowledge, you can share the approach that has been used, right? So if you're buying a company, this is what you would look for. What policies are in place? What procedures do they have defined? So that way you know, hey, how have they delivered their service or created their product throughout the years? And then if you're the one selling, this could be a value add to the organization if you're able to say, hey, look, here's everything that we do and how we do it and so forth. So just a little sidestep there from the presentation, but some of you on this call might be in that moment where you're buying or selling another organization. All right, let's continue on a little bit further with procedures, and then I promise we'll get into processes. So procedures, the intent of them is just to provide clarity to our team on how to perform the task, right? What's expected of them as they are working throughout the day, throughout the week, to get their specific task or work done. It needs to give specific steps, and I know it might seem elementary, but essentially what you want to do is be able to put the document in front of them and have them complete it pretty much on their own. The first time, yeah, they're going to have questions. Maybe the second time just need a little bit of reassurance, but essentially if that person is out unexpectedly for, let's say, a car accident, you need to be able to have somebody jump in and maybe do that task for them. So keep that in mind. If you do have procedures in place, are they as defined as you need them to be able to plug somebody else in emergency basis, right? If somebody can't come to work the next day and you need to get that product or service delivered. But this too will also help with standardizing your approach. That way you have that quality, you have consistency, and it just overall provides a better experience for ultimately your customer or client. And a tip or trick for you is to create a system, a library, a cataloging system, whatever you want to call it, to inventory what are those procedures and where can they be found? How do employees access them so they can't memorize every single task potentially that they have to do day in and day out? Or if they have, maybe it's a good idea for them to refresh every so often or make recommendations on how to update the procedure. Is there a better way to do it? Has technology allowed us to do it faster and so forth? So at the end of the day, this needs to be a valuable tool that people are going to want to use. So if people aren't using it currently, let's take a fresh look at it and say, well, why would that be, right? Is it because they just refuse to and the behavior needs adjusted? Or is it because it's just not helpful and we can do a better job of providing that clarity and clearing up some of that confusion? So I want to talk about one example over the years that really stood out, two examples that really stood out to me as organizations that had procedures nailed, right? So if you think about McDonald's, we've all eaten there, maybe a couple years since you've walked in the doors, but this is a good time to just walk in and get maybe a milkshake or something if it's hot where you're at. But essentially you walk into every McDonald's and you know that to the left is the drive-through area. French fries in the front are the either kiosks or the people taking our order. You have the boards above to the right, usually are the restrooms. And so they have a process, or I should say they have a format to the way that they build their buildings. It's consistent from one to the next. So that way employees are familiar immediately when they walk into any one of the locations. And then they have these steps and the sequences and the tasks that the employees have to complete, very well thought out, that it's the same no matter which location you would go to, right? Now, the one caveat is that because it's franchise owned, you might have some subtle differences. So it's not going to be perfect, but it's a really good example of seeing that consistency, knowing that the procedures are the same, well-defined, and so forth. So the other one that comes to mind is I worked at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. And when I worked there, we had SMAC cards, right? I wasn't really allowed to be saying that, but SMAC, self-managed action cards. And what that allowed us to do is for each position, it specifically talked about the role and then talked about what are the things they need to be doing and so forth. We also had recipe cards, right? So as you think about salad dressings, you think about the desserts, you think about the yummy sweet potato casserole that they have, it was clearly defined. We had a racking system, bright colored cards, and we could at any time pull one of those cards, pick up the recipe or the ingredients and start making that dish, and probably the first time be able to prepare it the way that somebody who's been there a couple of years can prepare it, right? The consistency was there. And I'm not saying it's like a McDonald's, because there's definitely a great experience at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse if you haven't been there, but that definitely was very helpful for when we were bringing in new hires, we were training them, and if we had some complaints come through, we had to be able to go back and research where that breakdown occurred, right? And so we could follow that back and look at the flow. Was it because the ingredients were bad, or the right steps or measurements weren't used? What breakdown occurred that we didn't provide the same quality consistency to the client, right? So just give that a little bit of thought as you have those examples of how that could be helpful within your organizations, and it can apply to any industry. I know I just shared food examples, but when you have something like that, a system in place, it definitely can be helpful in many different ways. So let's go ahead and do our next poll question here. What's your biggest pain point with processes? I'm interested to know. You don't have them defined. There's no bad answer here. People don't follow them, or they are outdated. I'll give you a moment to not hear my voice. We're at 63%, so we got to get to 85 and go. We're getting closer. Kelly, when you believe we are ready, go ahead and close it down, and then we'll share those results.
Alrighty. Alrighty, let's share them, Christy.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the results a little bit, and then I want to know if we have any questions that came in before we dig into the processes. So looks like, we have 50+% people that don't follow procedures. That's normal. And then it's split evenly in the two other areas. So if you don't have procedures, again, it can be overwhelming. It can be very daunting to say, how are we going to get this done? We're already so busy. We don't have enough people to get our normal jobs done. How do we add this? Well, you have to put it in bite-sized pieces. So if you need help prioritizing how to define them, get them updated, etc., happy to lean in and help you and give you some suggestions, or help you take the heavy lift off of it. And then people not following them, I would ask why. Are there a couple key individuals in your organization that you could just ask them, why don't you follow them? Is it because they're outdated? Is it because they're not helpful? They're not clear? It's confusing? Try to find out what the reason is. If there's complete disregard, well, then that's a place where we have to talk about an individual specifically. But before we do that, we want to make sure as an organization, we have done everything possible to set the individual up for success and making sure that the procedure is exactly where it needs to be, because then we can hold them accountable to that. And if they choose not to perform, well, then we might have to go down a certain path. All of you know what that is. So, okay, let's go ahead and move forward here to processes. But first, Kaylee, are there any questions that have come in that we should answer before we dig in?
Nope, there's no questions in here, Christy.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we're halfway through the slide deck. Some of these will go really quick. Other ones we'll spend a couple minutes on. And my goal is to leave hopefully 5 to 10 minutes at the end to answer any questions that do come in. So please enter questions. I like having it interactive than me just talking at you for the full time. So processes. We've talked about policy, which is the rule. We talked about the procedure. How do I get it done? So the process is really that flow, right? It's a series of actions or steps taken in a particular order to achieve, a specific end, a desired outcome, etc. So here is an example of a process. The employee uses technology to enter the hours worked. So we already talked about that, whether it's Vision, Vantage Point, QuickBooks, Viewpoint, whatever, and or their paid time off daily. They submit the timesheet by close of business every Friday. Supervisor reviews and approves that time, or goes back to the employee and gets some edits done before they can then submit or approve by noon on Monday. That time, payroll manager transfers the time into the payroll software. certainly there's a variety of different tools or technology that can be used there. And then they process the payroll so that way the deposits of the net pay go into the employee bank account by Friday, right? So as you can see, there's multiple places along this process where there are specific procedures that have to be done to be able to accomplish what's listed here, right? We already talked about the policies surrounding employees entering their time. You can see that a supervisor in there also has to review and approve timesheets. I did put by noon on Monday in there, although you probably wouldn't need to add that there because that would be back in a policy that you have with regard to what the expectation is of a supervisor when they're approving timesheets. And then certainly within your payroll function, whether it's one person and that's all they do for your organization, or if it's somebody in your accounting or HR departments who handle payroll, there's specific procedures they're following to be able to not only review the timesheets, but then, process them with payroll and so forth, getting employees set up in the timekeeping system, terminating them out when they leave the organization, and all the updates along the way. So you can see that a process is that flow based on what are we specifically doing. We're looking at people working their hours and then paying them for the effort that they invested in our organization. Very similarly, you would have that with any of your products or services as well. There's a flow. We receive an order, we start working on that order, fulfilling it, and then get it out the door, etc. Oh, we have to do some rework. It's coming back in the door because the quality isn't there. And so you would have a process for that as well. So what's the advantage of a process? Well, it does show the flow of work that needs to get done. And usually there's a particular sequence. And if you don't follow that sequence, then maybe the quality isn't there, the consistency, etc. So some cases you might be able to do things out of order, but normally there's a specific way that something has to be done, service or product. But by having processes in place, now we can hold people accountable. We've got the policies, we've got the procedures, and what is that flow? And where are those decision points along the way? Who's responsible for getting certain things done? Who are we going to hold accountable, and so forth? And that is the goal of the rest of the session here, is to dig into those a little bit further. But essentially those processes, when we define them and we know exactly how we want to make sure something flows through our organization, we can then achieve those desired outcomes that we're looking to achieve, products, service, etc. And so, we want to make sure that our processes are most efficient. So that's why I asked about the silos in your organization, or the communication or the collaboration. Do we have barriers there that are not allowing the process to flow as smoothly as possible? We can't be as efficient as we could, and we're not seeing consistency or the same amount of quality because each area is following their own set of procedures that aren't aligned and may not be held to the same standard or expectation as another area of the organization. So we have that misalignment, there's confusion, there's lack of communication. All those things definitely jeopardize our ability to have a smooth process or flow through our organization. So one thing that you can do is create a process diagram. If you're not familiar with that, type it into Google and you will pull up a million examples. I've got a couple here for us to walk through on the next couple slides, so you don't have to Google while I'm talking. You don't need to multitask. But essentially, it's a visual representation of the different steps and decisions needed to perform a process, right? So you have a beginning, and then there are certain steps that have to be taken. You identify who does that task or takes that step, what decisions need to be made, yes, no, maybe so. Are there documents along the way that are created, generated, handed off, etc.? And then are there specific actions as a result of that flow that need to be taken? And then essentially the process ends, right? So process ends either because I've paid my people, I've hired them, I fired them, I created my widget, or I delivered the service, etc. You can just apply it to any situation that you might have in your organization. I am going to weave in another industry in here because I know you're probably tired of me talking about services and products. But anyway, let's look at this flow chart or process diagram. You can see right there is that starting point, right? Do we have a decision that needs to be made? before we can determine what process is going to be followed, right? You might have different service lines, you might have different products or outcomes you're looking to achieve. So it might then determine what process are you specifically going to follow for this example. And then are there actions that you need to take before you can consider this process complete or done? Let's look at the emergency department. I had the pleasure of visiting the emergency room earlier this year for a kidney infection, but anyway, so I thought this one was relatable. So I arrived in the hospital, right? And so they're taking my vitals and they're doing all that good stuff. I had to sit in the reception area for maybe 20 minutes. It wasn't painful. But then I went through the course of questions, testing, etc. They were treating me for what ended up being a kidney infection. And then they had to decide, is she free to go home or do we have to keep her? Is she going to be admitted? Luckily, I was not admitted. I was discharged and all was well. But you can see along this way that I was the patient, right? The person that they were providing a service to came into their organization, and then there were things that they had to apply. And while my experience wasn't the best, I will tell you that I was very impressed with their processes, the things that they did, the documentation, the ability for me to get real-time updates on an app. I was impressed. So they've got some things ironed out there for sure. But anyway, so along the way, there were decisions being made about what did they see when they, did some testing and blood work and so forth. And then the doctor, well, physician assistant had to make that decision, right? And action was taken then because they signed everything off and sent me out the door. So thought maybe some of you could relate to that at a very high level, very simple example. Let's talk about a little bit more in depth of something that I know all of you can relate. So think about when you're hiring someone, right? You may or may not be using an applicant tracking system. And if you're not, you still are handling those maybe manually through a spreadsheet or some other means, paper, etc. But what are all the different ways that you're reaching out to find people? Through job boards, LinkedIn, referrals, etc. Not going to read this whole thing. And then based on that, what are the next steps? You're going to look at the resume. You might have somebody speak to a manager internally or a recruiter. Does this person meet those basic qualifications? If not, we're going to send a rejection email. If so, yep, let's go ahead and do a phone screening. See if they continue to meet the criteria, have them meet with the team internally for face-to-face interviews. And then that decision comes, hey, should we ask them to join our organization and do the offer letter? Or no, still not a good fit. We're going to go ahead and just decline and then hopefully find a different person that would be a better fit. All of you have lived this. And so as you go through this process, you can see that there's different people involved. There's certain steps that have to be taken. There's actions that are completed, decisions made, and so forth. And so I thought this was a really good one to put in front of you, just so you can start working with this. If you haven't done anything like this before, having a good example that you can relate to is super helpful. The other thing that I would propose you take a look at is a RACI matrix. And if you haven't seen one or heard of it before, I got an example for you on the next slide. So as you're thinking about your processes and you know the steps that need to be taken, the decisions that have to be made, the actions that need to be taken, etc., think about who is responsible for each one of those steps, each one of those decisions, and or each one of those actions, etc. Who is that person working on that activity? Is it one person? Is it multiple, etc.? And then think about who is going to be accountable for what gets done. Who has that ultimate decision-making authority? Is it a team leader? Is it me as an individual contributor? Do I have some level of decision-making ability? Because I've got the policy, I got the procedure, and there really is nothing that has to be elevated to the level of a supervisor or manager, etc. So then, is there a key stakeholder who has to be included in the decision or that work activity? Does it have to be escalated to a supervisor? If so, why? What are we looking for that supervisor to discern or to make a decision on? Are they clear on how to make that decision, right? And so those are all things that we would weave into our policies, procedures, and think about the flow of the work. How do we avoid any bottlenecks, but also ensure that we are making the right decisions along the way so we can avoid, hopefully, some big consequences. And then at the end of the day, I am so sorry I have a spelling mistake here, but who are we informing? It shouldn't say responsible. You can see I copied and pasted. But who is a person that needs to know of a decision or action? And we'll go ahead and get this edited, and then Kaylee can make sure you get the clean copy when we send it out. I do apologize. But anyway, RACI is responsible, accountable, consulting, and informing. So let's look at a chart here. Real high level example, you want to think about, okay, what are those key things or steps that have to be accomplished? Are we designing something? Are we creating something? Are we coding something, etc.? And then across the top, you'll see examples of different roles, and you'll see those letters throughout this chart as to who is responsible, accountable, consulted, informed, etc. And again, there's just a slightly very different definition here to the right-hand side. So walking through this, now you can see how you can elevate the accountability within your organization, because now you know who's supposed to be doing what, and you're giving them guidance on what they should be doing. And if it's falling short and we're not producing the sweet potato casserole consistently, now we need to figure out, where did that breakdown occur? Is it the person that prepared it? Is it the person who, ordered the recipe or the ingredients? Is it the person that baked it that night? Is it the server that did something? Figuring out, okay, who did what in that process that caused a breakdown. So let's go ahead and do our third poll question here. Kaylee, if you want to tee that up for me. I want to know if your processes are aligned with where leadership wants to take the company into the future. So if you defined your processes many, many years ago, your answer is probably going to be no. But go ahead and get us close to that 85% mark, and then we'll go ahead and close it down. Kaylee, any questions come in while we're waiting for people to answer?
There hasn't been any questions that came in, but I did update that spelling and upload a new version, so you can re-download that as well.
Wish I would have caught that before I considered it final. I'm sorry.
Looks like there's 76%, so we'll give it a few more seconds here and then I can close it down for you, Christy.
Perfect. And if anybody has any thoughts as well, you don't have to just submit a question. 2 sessions ago, we had a very lively discussion because people were adding to the conversation, sharing insights, their perspectives, opinions, and so forth. And it was really helpful because it allowed us to have a lively conversation, as I said. And again, I don't need to be the only one that talks here. So go ahead, Kaylee, let's post that out so we can bring us home here on this webinar. All right, looks like many of you are unsure. So great question to take back to your leadership team and try to figure out, what needs to be adjusted as we think forward. And I'm going to give you some insights there to help take that conversation a little bit further. But yeah, I'm glad to see 42% of you do believe that you're aligned and in a good place. So that's fantastic. And if not, it's okay. You just work to make it better. Got to know where you're at before you can start carving out a path to where you want to go. So here are some things to consider now that we talked about policy, procedure, and processes. Do you have the right knowledge, skills, and abilities within your organization with the people currently on your bench to be able to perform each of those tasks successfully? And you might be saying, well, I'm not sure. Well, a good way to figure that out is looking at your job and position descriptions. Identify what is needed in that role. And then specifically, you can look at individuals and say, well, they're hitting the mark on all of these areas. They have all this knowledge, skills, and ability, but here are 1 or 2 things that, I think that they could elevate with training and development, mentoring, coaching, etc. So I definitely place a lot of emphasis on job and position descriptions. Some will disagree with me, but I strongly believe that that's the tool that helps employees know what's expected of me, what am I supposed to know, understand, be able to do to be successful in this role. And then do we provide the right tools and resources needed to perform the tasks? Are we giving the individuals the right measuring tools to make the sweet potato casserole? And I'm sorry, I keep keeping it basic. However, I think it's all something we can relate to. Am I giving them the right tools to be able to prepare what they need to? Or is there opportunity for me as a supervisor, as the owner of the organization, to do a better job? Giving better technology, better equipment to do the job is just going to help everybody along the way. And through that exercise, you'll be able to identify pretty quickly what are the priorities that we should focus on for our training and development. We've all heard that especially the younger generations want to be able to continuously learn and grow as an individual, personally and professionally. And so how can we help them feel more connected to our organization by giving them opportunities to further enhance their skills and abilities, because maybe they desire to be part of that decision-making process? Well, how can we help them be better decision makers, troubleshooting, problem solving, etc.? And then are there any rewards along the way that we can offer for people who follow the policies and perform the procedures accurately with very minimal mistakes, and then make sure that we have smooth processes? I know a lot of that's inherent within the role that you hired them for, but is there a place you want to put some emphasis, especially throughout the rest of the year or going into next year, that if you gave them a little reward, you could get closer to the place that you wanted to be, to that outcome or desired result that you're looking to achieve? And so one thing that I want you to walk away thinking about, you've seen these slides if you've been on any of my webinars, but as you look at the future and you know what's next for your industry, if you say, I don't know what's next, well, then we can help you figure that out. But when you know what's next and you can see the opportunities out there, what are the processes and things that we have to have in place to be able to take advantage of those opportunities, or to be the one that creates those opportunities to really shape that future that we're looking to achieve? Because all of those things are a recipe for getting people excited and motivated and really interested in staying with your organization. And when you're able to leverage that excitement and their strengths, that's where you accelerate that success, right? Going where others in your industry, your competitors, are afraid to go and really just don't have that confidence to get there, right? So I'm going to leave you with this, is if you don't know what's next, think hard about how demographics moving through your organization is going to impact what you do and how you do it. Think about the importance of technology and how that's going to increase. How is that going to help us maybe minimize that information overload? Is it a point of frustration? And if so, how can we relieve that? And then regulations. We don't know what's going to happen this fall, right? But certainly we can monitor and make sure that we're prepared for what might come down our pathway as far as the rules and regulations that might come into place. And does that impact some of our policies and procedures or the way that we move things through our organization? So if I have interested you at all in finding out more about this last piece of the organizational architecture, we've walked through purpose, culture, processes. We just did strategy a couple weeks ago, and now we're going to do structure after today in a couple weeks. So definitely join me for that one. But the one that you should really be excited about, so if you are familiar with the anticipatory organization, and if you have read the book or would like to know more to be able to find out what is the best path for our future, for our organization, then you want to join us on Thursday, September 8th. The author, the one and the only, Daniel Burrus, is going to be joining us. So we're super excited. We want you to be there. It's free. Register on our website and join us, because I definitely think he will transform your mindset walking away from that conversation. So what I'd like to do now is see if there are any questions. I see a couple orange things flashing on my screen. Kaylee, are there any just ideas shared or questions that the audience has for me specifically?
Sure thing. Here's a thought from the last polling question that we had. Another answer might be, we're working on it. We are currently trying to address processes, but it takes, in all capital letters, time.
Yes, it does. Bite-sized pieces. So whether you have 30 minutes or an hour, put it on your calendar. Daniel Burrus will definitely encourage you to put things on your calendar, put it on your calendar, carve out the time so that way you can commit yourself to it. But I agree, time is very precious. It's sometimes hard to find.
All right, here is a question with a little bit of background. It says,
Yeah.
we are a small company with generally good processes and definitions, but contemplating the benefits of better definition of process with too much bureaucracy. Any advice on how to avoid the bureaucracy?
Yeah, well, start with the definitions. If you can agree on the definitions and agree why certain things are important to the why of the organization, by instead of pointing fingers about who has an opinion on what, point it back to specifically what the organization is trying to achieve, why it's so critically important, and see if you can get agreement along the way. Yes or no answers. Do you agree that this is appropriate or not? And if they say yes, perfect. If they say no, say why, right? And point them back to why are we doing what we're doing, our purpose, the strategy we set out to achieve, and then lead them into, okay, well, in order to do X, Y, and Z, this is what we have to do because it's the most efficient way. So if you want to talk more specifically and dig into the granular, let me know, and I'm happy to have a separate conversation because I might have a few more ideas for you with knowing a little bit more detail. We have 5 minutes left.
So here's another one. Any suggestions on how to reward desired behaviors?
Yes. First, think about those individuals that you want to reward. Is it all? Is it a specific group? And is there something intrinsically that they're motivated by? So it could be working with a mentor, working with a coach, taking on maybe more challenging work, helping to problem solve, use different skills in their work, and really try to identify what is it that they might be interested in receiving a reward. So incentives that they have the ability to control how much or how little they get are effective. Pizza parties are not, although they're nice, right? Who doesn't like good food? But that's how I would reward that desired behavior. Figure out who, figure out what behavior you want to reward, and then how does it intrinsically align with what might be motivating them for joining your organization and staying with your organization, right? People like to be recognized, appreciated, they want to learn and grow. So within those 3 buckets, you might be able to find something. If it's not a one size fits all, you might be able to create a few subcategories and then treat them slightly different, all with the goal of, showing how much you recognize that they've done to get you to the desired results you're looking to achieve.
So here's another comment that says, I've found that having a backup plan is a must.
Absolutely. There's many things we could talk about, but yes, cross-training, backup plans, those definitely are important.
I'm not seeing any more in here as of right now.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for this hour. I appreciate your participation in some of the conversation, and you should see that the updated handout is there, ready and available for you, and I hope to see all of you in a couple weeks when we talk about structure. Thank you.